Well, another very warm welcome back, all my vintage dirt bike loving YouTubers, and thanks to you all once again for retuning to Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, a big shout out to all the brand new subscribers who have currently signed up to my channel since my last video posting. I think that takes our current subscriber total to around the 11,500 mark. So thanks to each and every one of you for subscribing to my YouTube channel. Okay, coming up in this next video, we're going to take a look at a few lovely machines from the Stewart Roden collection. Now, some of you may have already seen a few of these bikes on my channel in previous videos, but we've decided to combine at least 5 of Stewart's lovely bikes into this short video for you all to take a look at, so I do hope you enjoy them. Okay, enough chitty chat from me for now. Let's just jump straight into Stewart's first classic machine. Okay, so the first bike that we're going to look at in Stewart's collection is this lovely 1974 Benk Aberg BSA 500. Now, the story behind this particular bike is that it was commissioned to be built by Aberg's sponsors back in the 1970s, and naturally it was all put together by the very talented Eric Shaney, and then of course subsequently delivered to its customer. Now, as far as I'm aware, it wasn't very clear if Aberg actually rode this bike after it was delivered, although not long after it was then placed into a Swedish motor museum where it lay for many years undisturbed among many other classic bikes and motor cars. But just recently the museum was then selling off some of its assets, and Stewart got the word that this Aberg BSA was also on the for sale list, and he more or less bought it sight unseen, as he already has a few BSA engined CCMs in his collection, which of course we'll have a look at very soon. But the bike is powered of course by this big BSA B50 power plant, and of course placed inside one of Eric Shaney's superb hand-built frames. Although I'm not aware if there have been any tuning or upgrades done on this engine, but I suspect that if the bike was destined to be raced by the mighty Aberg, then you can almost guarantee that this won't be a stock motor that we're looking at. But again, I suppose the very fact that this bike was placed into a museum at all tells you that it must have had some kind of connection with the great man to secure its place in history and warrant keeping it safe for prosperity. But Stewart told me that he's done absolutely nothing to this bike since he bought it, and it's just as he acquired it. But he also told me he's never even started the motor for the fear of maybe breaking something on this very valuable machine. But the quality and workmanship on these Shaney frames is just outstanding, although this of course was a time when the British motorcycling manufacturing were building some of the best off-road frames in the world. But Stewart's certainly grabbed himself a little piece of motorcycling history here in this Aberg BSA, because it's a quite unique and rare motorcycle, and let's face it, who wouldn't want this little beauty taking pride of place in anyone's motorbike collection? Okay, moving on now. This next machine of Stewart's is a remanufactured CCM bike, and this is a good example of the kind of Alan Clues classics that you can now put together these days. Now, Stewart's bike here was on display at the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Show in 2020, and people were certainly showing a lot of interest in this bike while it was on the Scottish Motorcycle Racing Club stand over the course of the 2 days. Now, naturally it's not an original CCM bike, but essentially it's based around a 1970s Clues model. Now the bike's not entirely built from new parts, as it still has the original front forks with the front and rear CCM brake hubs, and of course the motor is a BSA B50 unit from back in the day. Now, as you know, more or less all of Alan Cluse's CCM bikes were powered by these big BSA B50 four-stroke motors, except of course his 1979 and 1980 bikes, which of course used the Italian-made Hyro two-stroke engine. But these 3-speed CCM motors were the result of Alan Cluse just taking the standard B50 500 engine and then improving it and retuning it for more power. Now Stewart, as you can see here, has had a custom made seat done for his bike, and these very high quality embroidered items are made by Transcal right here in Livingston in Scotland, and they manufacture all kinds of bespoke parts for top of the range vehicles and of course the occasional motorcycle. Now, as far as I'm aware, this fuel tank is the real deal from the 1970s, although it's of course had a brand new paint job and a new graphics fitted. Now, Stewart raced these older CCMs back in the day and was a friend of the late Alan Cluse, and Stewart did keep a lot of his old original parts from his racing days, and he's now putting them to good use by building more of these iconic race bikes. Naturally, a high quality pair of Öhlins piggyback shocks on this example, as the original Girling dampers are of course no longer available for these bikes, but these Swedish Öhlins units are very top quality replacements, and they'll certainly cope with anything that the big CCM encounters at the rear end. Now, Stewart's bike once again has the original CCM hubs, which are quite rare parts to get a hold of these days, and I've seen CZ and even Myco brake hubs used on these repo CCMs, because original hubs of course are so difficult to source. But this front hub again is an original CCM part, and as I recall, these were made in exotic magnesium back in the 1970s, probably just to try and keep the full up weight of the bike to a minimum. But although this is not a fully original bike, it's still a nice piece of kit, and like I said, there are plenty sources out there nowadays who are making frames and just about everything else you need to put together your very own CCM repo bike. But of course these bikes don't come cheap, so be prepared to dig deep into your spare cash reserves if you want someone to build you a version of Stewart's Alan Cluse classic. Okay, our next bike from Stewart's motorcycle collection is this very nice 1978 440 Myco Magnum. Now, this is a bike that Stewart purchased some time ago, and since then he's done a full restoration on it, but this is not, and I repeat, not an original bike from 1978, and it was never ever meant to be restored as a bike from 1978, because Stewart refurbished this bike not as a shiny showpiece but as an everyday race bike, and hence some of the non-original parts that are fitted to it. So there's no need to start bombarding me with comments saying that the tank is wrong or the seat is wrong on this 1978 bike. Although despite what some people may think, this is still a cracking example of one of these alloy tanked Myco twin shockers. Now, if you know your Mycos, then you'll know that these 440 motors were among some of the best engines that Myco ever produced, and I myself had an identical motor in my 1980 bike, and although it may not have had the power of its bigger brother, the 490, it still had a smooth spread of usable power, and not of course the big hit that you got from the 490 when you snapped the throttle back. Now, as you'd expect, the bike's expansion chamber is almost certainly a modern day replacement for the original 1978 pipe, and of course you just can't beat an older Bing carburetor to supply the juice to feed that very thirsty 440 piston port power plant. And these alloy tanked 78 and even the 79 models were certainly among some of the nicer looking micro twin shockers of their day, and it's said that if you couldn't lay your hands on a good 490 Mega 2, then these 78 and 79 bikes were certainly a good alternative, because they did have a similar frame geometry and handled just about as good as its bigger sibling. Although you have to admit that Stewart's done a cracking job on this bike, and when your day job consists of repairing and servicing upmarket motors like Ferraris and Porsches, then you'll know that attention to detail and the quality of your work is all that really matters at the end of the day, and Stewart's certainly reflected that in this quality refurbishment. Okay, not all the parts are original, but that doesn't really matter in this case, because this bike was never put together to get its pictures taken. This is just another old classic that Stewart will throw his leg over at the next classic or vintage race event, and it just so happens that I managed to get a few shots of the bike prior to it being abused in the Scottish landscape. So for me, original or not, it's still a little beauty, and I'm sure that it'll take its place alongside Stewart's other vintage classics until its time comes to take part once again on a muddy Scottish racetrack. Okay, next up we have another British classic from Stewart's collection, and this time it's his John Banks 500 CCM from 1974. Now, yet again, this example is not a fully 100% original bike from that year, although the frame and swing arm and the motor and the front and rear brake hubs and a few other smaller items are certainly bona fide original parts that were fitted to the bike when John Banks rode it back in the day, although Stewart didn't want to just hide the bike away in the corner of his workshop as an occasional talking point so that he could say that John Banks once rode this machine in the 1970s. Stewart wanted to use this bike as an everyday or weekend racer, and that's why some of the older and worn out 1974 original parts were then changed for more modern user friendly items, just in order to make the bike safer and more easier to ride. Once again powered by the mighty awesome BSA B50 MX engine, which in their day could certainly beat the best 4-stroke or 2-stroke on the track. And of course when you had John Banks or even the mighty Bob Wright in the saddle of one of these Alan Clue specials, then you knew that they were capable of passing just about anything on the racetrack. Now again, a big bore straight through exhaust system, and we'll be able to have a listen to this little beastie just shortly, so look out for that. Now normally these would have had a standard 3-speed gearbox, which of course was more than enough cogs to cope with the huge amount of torque that was produced by that long stroking BSA motor. Now, an original frame swing arm and rear brake hub on this bike, which is quite rare to find on these older CCMs, but this rear sprocket will have to certainly cope with whatever that BSA 500 motor supplies. But in terms of a good looking motorcycle, these CCM bikes have it in absolute bucket loads, and if you ever needed a motocross bike blueprint to begin making the perfect 4-stroke racer, then you certainly couldn't do any better than copy one of these older Alan Clue specials. And although this is not an original bike nowadays, Stewart told me that he still has all the original worn out John Banks parts from 1974, so if he ever wanted, he could still put this bike back to its 1974 status. Okay, our final bike from this part 1 of the Stewart Roden collection is another classic 1974 580 CCM. Now, as I mentioned previously, back in the day, Stewart used to race the original versions of these 1974 bikes, and throughout his time on the track he amassed a very good collection of original CCM parts, and so after a racing break of almost 30 years, he thought it was about time that he built himself another one of his favourite vintage racers. But once again, this is not an original bike from that year, although the frame and swing arm are a reproduction copy of the original Clues design from 1974, and many of the other parts that have gone into building this particular bike are from Stewart's mountain of CCM bits and pieces that he's collected down the years. Now again, this CCM Classic is powered by the BSA B50MX power plant, and this 580cc 4-stroke 3-speed 2-valve motor is certainly a working piece of mechanical sculpture in its own right, as it still has its standard bore and stroke, although the motor's cylinder head has been ported and a set of big valves fitted. And once again, a big Italian-made Dell'Orto carburetor is used to feed the fuel into that big thirsty BSA 500 motor, and some of the other parts like this alloy fuel tank is another part that was taken from Stewart's CCM spares department of his workshop. Now the bike's rear brake and hub are PES reproduction parts, and these are very good quality, and once again another high quality embroidered seat that was made by Transcal. Now the original magnesium brake hubs for these CCMs, as I said previously, are very hard to come by, and these PES alternatives are a decent replacement, and they certainly look just right on one of these older racing classics. But again, another belter of a bike from Stewart's collection, and he's a very lucky man indeed to have such a collection of vintage race bikes sitting in his workshop, and hopefully sometime soon we'll be able to see more of Stewart's racers in a new part 2 video sometime in the future. Okay, just to finish off, let's just get this old girl fired up and have a quick listen to what she sounds like. Well, I do hope you enjoyed taking a look at a few of those lovely machines from the Stewart Roden collection, and I do hope to feature more of Stewart's fantastic looking bikes in future videos here on my channel, so hope you'll rejoin me to take a look at those. Okay, coming up in my next video posting, we're going to take a look at this lovely Heikki Mikkola replica Husqvarna, and this was a bike that I spotted at the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show in 2019, so I hope you'll rejoin me to take a look at that in my next video posting. But of course, until then, everybody continue to keep safe and well until we all meet up again to talk about all things vintage right here on Classic Dirt Bike TV.